hello everyone. Welcome to another Invent Talk. And I am Saulo do Barbosa, head of the Invent Research Center. And I have the pleasure to have with me today Brett Smith, who is Distinguished Professor at Miami University, among other things. And hello, Brett. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We've known each other for a long time. We actually met when we were PhD students. Remember that?
It's been a while.
It's been a while. So it doesn't make us any younger, right?
No, it does not.
Yeah. Brett, you've been doing great work on social entrepreneurship, and then more recently, you decided to focus yourself on the field of entrepreneurship and religion. And you founded a center that's called the Center for L.I.F E, leading the integration between faith and entrepreneurship.
Right.
And you're kind of the driving force pushing this emerging field, or as you were saying, maybe a re-emerging field to the foreground. So I wanted to start with a very simple question. Sure. Why should we care? Why should we care about, religion and entrepreneurship, about this intersection? Why does it matter to, researchers and practitioners as well?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be back at EM Lyon, and so it's a joy to be here. In terms of religion entrepreneurship, it's interesting because, to your point, it's a resurgent field, and all that to say that, look, if we go back far enough to William James or Max Weber or Dirk, there is a rich history of this intersection of faith and entrepreneurship, or at a minimum, faith and economic activity. And if we look at the entrepreneurship field, much of what we think we know tends to come from the disciplines of psychology or sociology or economics. And yet, none of those disciplines have any trouble with dealing with religion. And yet, in organizational studies, and maybe even more so in entrepreneurship, the majority of our research tends to be driven from an economic, individualistic, materialistic perspective. And while that has added much to the field, it also obscures other parts of the field, right? So why should we care about religion? In part because it's a major variable that affects the majority of the world's population, and it may materially affect how and why they do their entrepreneurial ventures, right? So if I were to say, the majority of the world cares about religion, or at least is affiliated with a religion, right. To many of those people, it is central to everything that they do, to their worldview, to the way they make decisions, to who they interact with, and that we have this established base of literature, and yet we're not tapping into it. If I said it was anything other than religion, you'd say we have to be. And yet when I say it's religion, we get the exact opposite reaction. Oh, we can't study that.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think people kind of refrain?
I think there are a lot of reasons. I think many of them, and Paul Tracy among others, would say, if we look at any of them, they're actually pretty easy to dismiss. But sometimes there is this personal relevance hypothesis. So some people will say, well, if it's not relevant to me, then why should we study it?
True.
I think particularly in Western Europe, you will see that some will argue that there is an increasing secularization, and therefore maybe it doesn't make as much sense. And yet across the world, the reality is there is a strongly religious tradition, even if the composition of those people is changing. In the United States, we see this huge growth, not in organized religion, but in people who are religious that are claiming to be nuns or not affiliated with any particular religion. But their religiosity hasn't gone away. That's just true. How they practice their religion, perhaps what they believe in their religion, maintains. And so the reality is it affects everything. The antecedents, the processes, the outcomes of the entrepreneurial process for many people. And if it affects those people, regardless of your own religious background or persuasion, the reality is we better educate on it. We better teach on it. We better research on it, because practitioners are bringing their faith into their entrepreneurial ventures across the globe. And so if we're not studying it, we're actually not arming the next generation of students or scholars for the reality. Some might say we have an incomplete understanding of entrepreneurship if we don't study this significant variable that's affecting the process.
Yeah, that's true. You know, we are in France, and in France, France has, a history that has trouble with religion, and it's quite of a, I'm saying it's an ambiguous relationship with religion, because the French Revolution kind of cut the head of the king, and the king was supposed to be the will of God manifested on earth, right? So, but surprisingly enough, when I go to conferences and people ask me what I'm doing, and I say, because of you, I'm doing research on religion and entrepreneurship, actually people are quite willing to listen to it and quite interested. And I guess you found some of that reaction too, right? When you started, I remember the first L.I.F.E conference, many good scholars there were actually very interested about the topic.
I think in part, scholars are drawn to emerging phenomena, right? So social entrepreneurship would not be any different, but go back in time 20 years ago. And they're drawn to phenomena that matter, right? And so if it's happening in practice, and we don't know much about it, they tend to be drawn to it. So when we started the L.I.F.E conference back 4 years now, I did not say, hey, let's hold a conference of anyone who's done a paper on this or who's written on this, because we wouldn't have had a conference. We'd have had maybe 2 people talking. But when instead we said, do you think this matters to entrepreneurship? And then we went to top scholars in the world, go right down the list. Jeff McMullen, Roy Sotheby, Melissa Cardin, Tom Lumpkin, just keep going right down the list. We had 35 of the top scholars in the world who said, this is interesting and I want to have a conversation about it. I don't know how and why it matters, but I know that it matters, and that's the interesting part. If we know that it matters, then we can do the research to understand how and why it matters. And so I think that's really what's driven the field. Fast forward 4 years today, we've had some 800 people across 25 different countries come to the L.I.F.E Research Conference in a virtual way. We've added a PhD seminar, and as we talked about in the seminar, we now see this literally tripling of research in the top tier academic journals in just the last 5 years. And so you do see this sort of reemergence of this interest in faith or entrepreneurship and what we're sort of calling religious entrepreneurship. How do you push these things together? And if so, what difference does it make?
And there are more and more special issues about it as well, right?
I think there are special issues. We just saw the special issue on small business economics that we had a paper in. There is an emerging issue coming out in entrepreneurship and regional development. And increasingly the top journals in the field, not just in entrepreneurship, but across organizational studies, across management, across finance. Some 10 of the top 50 Financial Times top 50 academic journals are saying, we are publishing work in this space. So I think you're seeing more legitimacy in this space. I think you're seeing lots of interest, but the interest had historically been, do your real research and your religion or faith research. And now we're saying, hey, those can be the same thing. Your real research can be on religion and entrepreneurship because it materially affects the processes.
You mentioned personal relevance. And I wanted to know, the hidden story about why you started this. Why do you think it's important?
For sure.
Why did you make a decision? Because I remember when you did, actually, we talked and you said, Saulo, I'm focusing all my work on this topic from now on.
Right.
And I'm not starting anything that's far away. And I admire that focus and that discipline that you have. But I wanted to understand, why? Why does it matter for you? Why did you make the decision?
Sure. So I think as an academic and personal are probably 2 different things, right? As an academic, I think this research matters because I think it's fundamentally affecting how people do their own entrepreneurial business. Personally, it also matters to me. So I am a person of faith, and therefore, in some ways, you almost have an insider perspective about how and why it might affect things. So we did a research study on the high highs and low lows of entrepreneurship that we did together. And the reality was when entrepreneurial ventures do poorly, we of course know that the entrepreneurial identity tends to also plummet. When it does really well, we also think the entrepreneurial identity tends to go up or increase. And the question was, what role does religion or faith play in that? As you know, in our study, we found it's a moderating role. It actually counterbalances both the highs and the lows. And I think those are some of the insights that I think as a person of faith, I think I knew that in my own life. And now the question became, okay, what relevance does that have here in this professional sphere? So if I go far enough back in my journey, we both began doing research in social entrepreneurship. For me, that was due to my own faith. Now, it need not be. Lots of people do great research in that space. But for me, it had to do with my own personal faith. It externally, none of that mattered. We didn't talk about it a lot, but that's why I did the work I do. Here, we've become a bit more overt about this space and now tried to say, okay, what does it look like to bring our faith into that? So it matters to me as a person of faith because I think it matters to the phenomenon. And I think there's actually an opportunity as a person of faith to bring that faith into your academic research and show that it matters. Now, I also think when you do that, you have to be really careful, right? Because you can't be biased. I think I've mentioned to you, we had a funder who came to us and said, will you do a study that says? And I said, no. I said, I will do a study and we'll see what it says. But we still have to be very careful about being objective about the data. And so how do we understand not only where faith or religion might have a positive influence, but also where might it have a negative influence? From my own Christian background, I think we have looked at a number of studies and tried to be very forthright about here are all the possible outcomes that come along with that, but also here are some of the complexities. So if I'm an impact investor and I'm looking at not only the financial return, not only the social return, now I have this added complexity of what about this spiritual or religious return? And how do I juggle those kinds of things? So for me, it's important as a person of faith to be able to bring that sort of whole self into work, but also because I think it's a missing and neglected variable that for 150 or 200 years, we've just sort of hidden away in the closet, even though we know it's really important. We know it materially affects the processes. Now as a field, we're bringing much more light onto that.
I remember when you talked about this subject to me, and I was reading a lot. I still read a lot. I like Joseph Campbell's work on comparative mythology, and much of what he's studying are sacred stories or sacred writings, from different religions.
Of course.
And when you told me you wanted to study this religion, and you asked me, what do you think? And I said, it changes everything when you integrate religion and I was thinking about just in my mind, to all the big constructions, the big monuments, the big endeavors that we had in the past, in history, all of them were connected with religion. I mean, most of them. It's very recent in history that we have this secularization and this materialism taking over. Because if you look, this is last century. If you look
for sure
at all the millennia that came before, well, human beings were driven by something else that was not only the material world.
And to your point, so I think we see that in lots of other spheres of life. Yes, so there is a personal relevance to me, but there's also a practical relevance, right? So if we look at something like social entrepreneurship, one of the arguably most interesting social entrepreneurs that I've studied is William Wilberforce. And William Wilberforce, who goes about as one of many people trying to abolish slavery, actually does it in large part based on his faith and based on his religious beliefs. So do we think it affects the entrepreneurial process? Absolutely. Does it do it sometimes in helpful ways? Yes. Does it do it sometimes in hindering ways? Yes. But does it do it? Absolutely. Like I think there's very little doubt about that. And so when you move from, hey, it's happening in the social sector, great, that's interesting. But actually, if you look at like Paul Tracy's work, he would say most of social entrepreneurship, the majority of it, is done either by people because of their religious beliefs or by religious organizations. And we just discount that. And it's like, boy, no. If the most of it is doing that, like, let's bring that to the fore and be willing to look at that and say, okay, what's happening? What's going on there?
I wanted to ask you about, the future avenues of research in this field. as you know, I was there for the last, it was 1 week, 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, yes.
Yeah, the last L.I.F.E research conference. And I loved the opening talk by Nathan French,
yes.
right? It was amazing. And I love it when he got this quote, I think, from William James, saying just that you should study religion, but he was talking about studying comparatively, right? And said if you know only one, then you know none.
Right.
Right. And I love that quote. So I guess one of the avenues for future research is actually to do more comparative studies, right?
I think that's right. So I think if we look at the literature thus far, I think you will see people doing largely a single religion. To the degree that they look at multiple religion, they'll do sort of large-scale studies with sort of very coarse variables, very proxy variables. But I think what increasingly you're starting to see is, no, let's go deeper into the mechanisms. Well, those may vary not only within religions, but certainly between religions. In my own work, we are collaborating with Ali Gumase, who has written a lot on Islamic entrepreneurship. And so I think we now have this ability to have a comparative approach. We're looking at a number of studies about what does it look like to do research where we can compare both a Christian perspective and an Islamic perspective, the two world's largest religions, and start to understand not only commonalities, but also important differences. So that, again, we can get a deeper appreciation for what's going on, but more importantly, why it's going on. So I do think if you look ahead to the field, I think A, there will be more research. I think B, there will be better research, and I mean by more rigorous designs. I think you're seeing that trend in the top tier journals with this tripling of publications in high quality journals. But I do think comparative religion will be a key issue. I think we will continue to move from a singular religion, which is important and we can get great depth, but I think to comparative religions where we can get better breadth to understand both across and between religions, what difference does it make in terms of the entrepreneurial process? The last thing I would say, almost all of our research has been, how does religion affect entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
I think you're seeing a smattering, but I think there's a huge opportunity to do more research the other direction. How do entrepreneurial approaches affect religion, right? So if you have this huge growing population of religious people that are unaffiliated, what does it look like? Do entrepreneurs step in to create new religions? Do entrepreneurs take a spin on different religions? There is a church back where I come from in the States that literally position themselves as the church for people that have given up on church. And so what you see is in a sense, right, as Nathan French talked, he said, look, yes, there has always been this conversation around secularization. And what we actually see over history is religion remains. Yeah. So if religion remains, what it also means is you will inevitably have more religious entrepreneurs that are doing so in the name of religion, that are actually doing it in and within and between religions to grow the religious base, not just to grow the economic side from a religious perspective.
Very true. Very true. I want to shift gears a little bit. And you know these cards. Well, you don't know these cards.
I don't know them.
But you know some of them. And this can go in any direction.
However you want to go.
Okay. This can go in any direction. I'm
I
gonna
get
ask
to pick
you.
a card.
Yeah, you pick 3.
Okay.
Don't look at them. Just
I've
pick
got this
3.
one and this one, and I think you stacked the deck, so I'll go that one.
So let's see. Oh, that's a joker. No, I'll get another one.
So it's a wild card.
It's a wild card.
Right.
Yeah, it's a wild card. I'll give you another one.
Excellent.
Okay? Yeah, okay. Do you think of yourself as an optimist or a pessimist?
I think an optimist for sure. I think I would tend to see the glass as half empty. I think even in this space, right? So people say, you're crazy. Like, you've done all this research in social entrepreneurship. Why on earth would you go do this research in religion and entrepreneurship? I say, because I see an opportunity.
You see it half full.
I think there's a path. I think that I look and I don't see fear or concern. I see possibility. I see opportunity.
That's very consistent with what we found in our last study, right?
It is, actually.
That actually entrepreneurs who integrate their faith within their businesses, they're more optimistic about other businesses.
And actually they filled in the gaps of negative data with optimism or faith. Actually, and again, there is some question about, is that good or bad? That is what they're doing. That helps us specify the relationship, but it could lead to negative implications if they go jumping off the cliff.
That's very true. That's very true. If you were reborn, what decade would you want to be a researcher in? I like this question.
Yeah. As an optimism, I wouldn't trade positions with anything. Like I think in any generation, there is an opportunity to do research that sort of shifts the conversation. And I think you and I have been blessed to live in an opportunity when first social entrepreneurship, and now in this case, religious entrepreneurship, is a fundamentally new conversation. So I guess from a personal perspective, if we were doing sort of normal science research, and truly, God bless those people who do, and it's hard and it's methodical, but I'm not good at making small incremental next steps. I want to take big steps in new and different directions, and I think we've lived through an opportunity where you could do that. Entrepreneurship, not so long, 30, 40 years ago, was the new thing.
Yeah.
Now different forms of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, in this case, religious entrepreneurship, are new steps. Man, I wouldn't trade it with anything. You add that with the abundance of technology today, this is a great time to be alive.
And to be a researcher,
oh, for sure.
You have much more capacity to do it than before. What is your most surprising finding across all the studies you have worked on?
Yeah. So we were just talking about this study with a colleague here. We went out and we're working in social entrepreneurship. We were working in Sri Lanka and Nepal, and we ended up working with an NGO that builds schools. And we went out and essentially compared two different ways to help people continue to contribute to the building of schools. Right. We partnered some communities with other communities through competition, and some communities with other communities through collaboration. Mm-hmm. And we went and ran the whole study. At the end of the study, we came back. Competition wins almost every single time, except one. There's one really important difference. Collaboration wins when the one community actually doesn't know the other community. No. We literally thought we had the data backwards. We thought we had transcribed it, right. and that it must be, no, when they do know the other community, they can do better than those that are competing. We go back out into the field, we sit down with the first group, and we say, hey, here's what we found. They're like, yeah, of course. We're like, what do you mean, of course? They're like, well, if I don't know that other community, then they may have more resources. And so I better be a good partner with them because I might have access. So we literally thought we had transcribed the data. We go out into the field, and in 30 seconds, the community members immediately tell us, no, not only do you have it correct, here's why you have it correct. But I think there's an important lesson in there about how you do research, about how you approach it with a certain amount of humility, about how, yes, you do have theories and you do have methodologies about how you're going to go into communities, but these communities were there before you and they'll be there after you. And I think we have to approach them with a certain amount of humility and grace and understanding that they are actually the knowledge experts and we're just trying to learn from them. We are literally working with them and to understand what they already know and articulate it in a meaningful way.
Yeah. That leads to another question I wanted to ask you.
No more cards.
No. I'll have another one because I love them. I'll have another one, but but I had a question in mind. I always ask this: is advice for junior scholars and PhD students.
Great.
You know, those who are starting their career in your field. Which advice would you give them?
Maybe this is too highly correlated, but I would say it anyhow. I think the advice that they often get is this normal science approach.
Right.
Do the next thing, stay in an established field, right? 3 decades ago, it was like, oh, do something else and entrepreneurship. Yeah. For us, it was do something more normal and social entrepreneurship. Exactly. I would say exactly the opposite. I would say the opportunities in these emerging fields to publish, it's 10 times easier to find something interesting to say when the entire field is up for grabs. When we are trying to understand everything about the process is when I think you can make bigger jumps forward. And I think too often the advice they're given from well-meaning PhD advisors suggests, no, be on this very established, this very institutional approach. Perhaps it's because we're entrepreneurship researchers. I would say be more entrepreneurial in your research. Like, go after new ideas, go after new opportunities. And I actually think the amount of gain you can have is much more significant. So I would say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to go after novel and new fields and things that you care deeply and are passionate about, even if it's not the flavor of the day, even if it's not the most established base of research. I actually think in the long run, you'll be better off as a scholar and probably far more interested as an individual.
Yeah. Rhett, thank you so much. I think after that, no more questions.
We can't do better than that.
That's great.
Thank you for the time and the opportunity. Yeah. It's been a pleasure to be here in Lyon, and I thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Yeah. You're welcome.
Of course.
Yeah, really. Thank you.
Thanks.